Welcome to the new episode of the Compliance Playbook. A lot of people ask me what is InfoSec Questionnaire and what is so prominent about it that Narad is solving. So, in this episode, we'll talk about what is InfoSec Questionnaire, who sends it, who receives it, why they are sent, how they are answered, and every nuance about the InfoSec Questionnaire. So, let's get started. So, even before we get into what is InfoSec Questionnaire, let me give you a good example that will help you to understand the overall scenario. So, assume you apply for a visa to any country. So, whenever you do that, first you are sent a checklist that talks about your whereabouts, your travel history, your financial, your police verification, your security checks, and why is it sent? Because with all these questions, the embassy or the government of that country is trying to understand that should you be allowed to get into the country, is there any security threat associated with you? Is there any financial threat associated with you? Once they have understood, once they have checked everything, only then you are provided a right kind of a visa to get into the country. So, this checklist is nothing but kind of a security check or kind of a background check on you before you are given a visa. Now, with this context, try to understand the high level definition of the InfoSec questionnaire. So, exactly like a visa checklist, InfoSec questionnaire is also a checklist which contains around 100 to 300 questions depending of kind of business, and it is used to evaluate a company's data security and a compliance policies. Let me show you a dummy checklist that will help you to understand what does an InfoSec checklist looks like. A checklist is generally divided into parts like data protection, policy standards, proactive security, reactive security. If you just read some question, it says, do you keep the sensitive data? If yes, how do you do it? How do you encrypt customer data? And questions like that. So, an InfoSec questionnaire is generally the questions around your company's data security and company's policies. And when you reply to these questions, eventually you are providing the standpoint of your company that how does your company manage the data security. Okay, now when you understand the definition, let's understand who sends it and who receives it. So in the first scenario, it is sent by regulators like RBI, MAS, Monetary Authority of Singapore, or HKMA, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, to the banks and NBFCs, because banks and NBFCs handle customers' data, customer assets, customer financial information. So regulators send this checklist, send this InfoSec questionnaires to bank, and eventually they try to get their position, try to get the bank's position that how secure is the customer data with them. So that's the first scenario when the regulator sends it to the bank to make sure the customer data is protected at any cost. The second scenario, because now these banks are regulated companies, so eventually these banks, these NBFCs, and anyone who are in the regulated domains, these companies also send the checklist or this InfoSec questionnaire to their vendors. This vendor could be SaaS companies, service companies, their partners, and eventually why they are sending it, because regulator is asking them that are you comply, and eventually they are also asking to their vendors that if we are getting compliant, you also need to comply. If you look at the overall flow, it looks like regulators send the checklist to their to the banks and NBFC. Bank and NBFC provide the response from their point of view, and eventually banks also send a InfoSec checklist to their vendor companies, trying to understand that how these vendor companies handle the data, handle the security. So now we understand what is the InfoSec questionnaire, who sends it, who receives it. Now let's try to understand in what scenarios or how many times in a year, at what frequency they are sent. So the first and foremost, every time a vendor company go out and try to onboard a new client, they will receive an InfoSec questionnaire, which is very necessary in the whole deal, because this is where the enterprise company is trying to understand, can this vendor really handle my data well? Do they have the right security policy? Do they have the right procedures? So that's the first scenario. Second scenario is every time there is an annual renewal of your contract. So it's not like that you sign a contract with a big enterprise company called SDFC, ICICI. It's not that they will just send you a questionnaire only once. they will send you always on a renewal of a contract, and few companies might send you biannual. Again, depends upon the line of business and depend upon how sensitive data you are handling. Scenario 3, every time the regulator and auditor wants to know more about your data security standpoint, they will send it to you. But in most cases, regulator only sends InfoSec questionnaires to the NBFCs, to the banks, but not to the vendor companies. But it might happen that if there are some questions being asked by a regulator to the banks, bank might go to their vendors if they need some clarifications, that in turn that they might have to send to the regulator. Scenario 4, every time there is a change in threat landscape. The classic example is COVID. So in COVID, most of the people were asked to work from home, but not every company was ready to give staff work from home. So senior manager or sales team might have always had the laptop, but for every team member, they were just given laptop from off the shelf. These laptops were not secured enough. They did not have VPNs. They did not have IP whitelisting. So it was a huge threat, and this was the time when regulator asked everyone that, okay, now you allowed your team to do the work from home, but what about the data security? Do you have the right controls in place? So these are the four classic scenarios when companies receive the security questionnaires. Now, how to answer it? Now, every time a question is asked about your password policy or data encryption policy, as a company, you are supposed to maintain the document. You are supposed to maintain a policies, procedures, SOPs for everything around the data security. And not just maintaining the document is enough. You need to also maintain the evidence or showcase the evidence when it is asked. Let's say you say that, okay, you have the multi-factor authentication, but just saying that you have the multi-factor authentication doesn't work. You need to also provide the evidence of it, that how are you supporting the multi-factor authentication. So as a company, once you have policies, once you have procedures, once you have SOPs and evidences, every time you receive the questionnaire, you need to provide the right information without the misinterpretation of question, without the misinterpretation of answer, and providing the right evidence. So that's how you prepare the response, by looking at all the documents that you have in-house and providing the right reference and right evidence. So what exactly then we are doing at Narad? So at Narad, we are automating the InfoSec compliance. We automating this InfoSec questionnaire thing. And why are we doing it? Because right now we looked at that when you need to prepare the response, you need to look at this plethora of information. You need to look at all the policy documents to prepare the response. This is very, very time consuming. This is inefficient. There are chances of lot of error, and eventually it takes a lot of time. So it is also expensive. So the solution that we are suggesting, that Narad, which is an AI powered compliance agent that automate your whole process, it takes away the manual effort, it speeds up your compliance, improve the accuracy, and because it reduces the effort, it also reduces your cost. And how actually it works? So in preload all your policies, procedure, and evidences, and every time you receive a new InfoSec questionnaire, so how would Narad respond? For every question, it will look at all your policy documents, all your procedures, all your evidences, and eventually provide the response. With every response, it also provides the reference and citation, that where is the answer coming from. And for also every response, it gives you then evidence that supports the response. So that's how the overall process gets automated. I was able to make you understand what is InfoSec questionnaire, who sends it, who receives it, and I could give you as much as information I could. So if you have any more doubts, please drop in the comments and I'll be more than happy to answer. And if you are the company who receive very frequent InfoSec questionnaires, drop us a line at support@narad.io. Thank you very much. Have a nice day ahead.